Good day. Welcome to the Africans in America podcast. With me is Weruche Ozoka.
Hi, everyone.
I want to start by thanking you all, our audience, for the support you showed us in our last video. For the first time, we also found out what that word viral means. The last video went particularly viral due to the support of many people who seem to like the topic we discussed last time. Obviously, President Ibrahim Traore evokes a lot of emotions, and his involvement in geopolitics has gotten a lot of Africans riled, and Africans have weighed in very significantly into what is happening to him. We will summarize that topic before we go into today's topic. Today's topic is the place of Africa in geopolitics regarding the Ukraine-Russia war. We've had a situation where recently the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, visited South Africa to garner support for his cause. It's a rare visit by a Ukrainian president. In fact, it's a very rare visit because it's never happened in almost 33 years. But the Russians also have had a long-running relationship with Africa, and many Africans tend to affiliate closer to the Russians, and many African countries are part of a big geopolitical bloc called the BRICS, in which has South Africa as an integral part of it. And that will be the topic we're discussing today. But before we even go into that, we want you to show us the love you have shown us from the last video, by subscribing and commenting on whatever we are discussing and sharing and liking our videos. The algorithm loves it. The algorithm is like it's like rain. It feeds on the likes and the shares and the comments. Thank you. Now, Weruche, going back to our last video, at
Yes.
last count, we were close to a sizable amount of viewership. Last time I checked, there were 42,000 views. And after that, there's a lot that happened. You felt that there were some missteps, where some places where you could have corrected some impressions people got, especially regarding the comments from the comment section. Let's just summarize those missteps, those things you feel you need to address before we move on to today's topic.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Just like Bimo said, thank you so much for um, paying attention to our video and communicating. It was great to read your comments. Some of your comments were harsh, oh, but that's okay. It was great to read your comments regardless. And it's just, I think what I like more than anything is the fact that you people are engaged in the politics on the continent. And I think that's what matters, because for change to happen, we all have to be involved. And that's what I like. I enjoyed seeing. And some of you maybe I don't know if you people watch the video to the end, but some of you thought that maybe I was opposed to Ibrahim Traore, or he was opposed, or we were opposed. No, we support him 150%. The reason we do, like I stated in the video, I like the fact that he made his country people priority, right? He made the things that affect his country people a priority. Electricity, water, education. I love that. I love that. And again, on a public space like this, everybody will have an opinion. So I want us to accommodate each other's opinions and all that. Like when we talk about Russia or our fear of Russia, and all of that. These are normal things you will encounter on the internet. Everybody will have their fear. Again, based on your location. Again. So that's kind of what I wanted to clear up, is that we support Ibrahim Traore. We love the fact that we actually want other leaders in Africa to take a page out of his book and learn, and how to self-govern. So I wanted to make that clear. But other than that, thank you. It was great to read your comments.
Uh, today's video will have a different pattern. Weruche has offered kindly to put all our journalistic skills to use today and be the one doing most of the interviewing. But before Weruche starts interviewing, uh, uh, my humble self, Weruche has a personal story of her involvement between Russia and Russians, the family involvement, where she has relations who had history in the past Soviet Union. What's your link to Russia?
My link to Russia. Hey, see trouble. I didn't know you were going to put this out there. No, I just have cousins from Russia. My mom's elder brother was lived in my mom's two elder brothers actually attended school and lived and attended college in Russia. First one ended up being a doctor, the second one an engineer. The engineer married a Russian lady, and I have Russian cousins who live in Nigeria. Some still live in one still lives in Ukraine. So that's my link to Russia. And actually, it was very interesting when Putin, there was a time I think last year, Putin put out a video where he was, I think, speaking about the black Madonna, the black Virgin Mary, but he spoke in Russian, and because I didn't understand what he opened a vault to show, ancient Russian art that involved that I want to say prove that black people really did like the people from Jerusalem and all that were really darker skinned than they look now in our texts. And so he opened the vault and he was speaking in Russian, and I didn't understand it. And I couldn't trust what I was seeing on the internet. So I sent it to my cousin to ask her exactly what he was saying. So that's kind of, that was my
Okay.
experience. So yeah. Hmm.
This personal story you have just stated now, it actually runs across a lot of African communities with a lot of Africans. The simple reason is this: Russia and Ukraine were part of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union had a very strong presence in Africa. And their presence, they at the time of the Cold War, the Russians, I mean the Soviets, um, through a mechanism called soft power, reached out to a lot of African countries and gave out scholarships. And those scholarships meant that a lot of Africans had access to the Soviet system and they schooled there. In Africa, in Nigeria, where I come from, a lot even married Africans. I mean, Russians, they married Russians, depending on the part of the Soviet Union where they were schooling at. They married
Yeah.
from Belarus, they married from Ukraine, they married from Russia, and some even married from Romania and all that. And they spoke those languages when they came back. Sometimes when they wanted to speak coded language, to be coded in their families, they would start speaking Russian to the Russian or Romanian and all that. And we all had friends growing up of that were like mixed. We call them a half caste where I come from, and
Mhm.
a lot of families, there was a lot of people who came back as doctors, as engineers,
Interracial.
and the involvement of Russia in Africa has been a long one, especially through the instrumentality of the Soviet Union and the
Mhm.
scholarship schemes and other student exchange schemes they used to run.
Mhm.
So it is not uncommon now that at a time like this, when geopolitics is dragging in Africa into its swell, where big countries are fighting for space in many forms, both either in the form of war or in the form of politics or in the form of diplomacy, they always find Africa to be important in this regard, especially since Africa has 54 countries, and that simply means 54 votes are the United Nations. Well, Richard, is there any particular thing you want to ask regarding the Russia-Ukraine relationship?
I have a lot of questions for you when it comes to that. I'll start with
Oh,
the
you're
first
frightening
one.
me.
I'll start with the first one. Okay. So, how does Zelensky's 2025 visit to South Africa, the first by a Ukrainian president in 33 years, how does it reflect Ukraine's evolving strategy to counterbalance Russia's historical influence in Africa, particularly given South Africa's BRICS affiliation and neutral stance in the war?
Well, it so happens that at this point in time, the Russia-Ukraine war, a very sad war that should not have happened. I support when President Donald Trump always says that this war should not have happened. It's a war between Slavic brothers. These two people were part of the Soviet Union, as I had already enumerated, and they should not have come to this point where they are at blows. And Ukraine has let a lot of things slide for a long time. And
Mm-hmm.
this is the time now that people are finding ways of ending the war. And diplomacy is more talked on more now than warfare. So when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to diplomacy, the role, the space that Russia and President Putin has in Africa is a huge one. For several years, President Putin has always, and the Russians have hosted an Africa-Russia summit.
Mm-hmm.
And this summit has gone on for several years. They have formed deep roots and deep ties. The Russians, particularly, have been very active in Africa in supporting many countries because we should remember one thing. After EU, United States, the Russians are the largest suppliers of arms to the world until this war came that they needed the arms to themselves. So many African governments, particularly those ones in North Africa, like Egypt, like Libya, and so many also in the Sahel countries, not necessarily, but in some other parts of Africa, they relied heavily on Russia for their security needs, you know. But many people don't even know that the biggest contribution, importance of Russia and Ukraine to Africa, especially again to the Muslim part of Africa, North Africa, which is wheat. Egypt, particularly, imports almost 50, 60% of our wheat, if not 80, from
Mm-hmm.
these two countries. These two countries are bread baskets in the production of wheat. Russia, particularly because of our vast resource of gas, has fertilizer. They are the largest producers of one of the largest producers of fertilizer apart from wheat. And for Africa, where which is a very agrarian continent, fertilizer is so important to us. Having said that also, you see that Russia, through the instrumentality of coalitions like the BRICS, this is an economic coalition as at now, made up of 10 people, 10 countries, and a number of um, newly admitted partner countries, you will see that the initial countries to form the BRICS were Brazil, Russia, India, and China and South Africa. But since then, Ethiopia and Egypt has joined BRICS, and
Mm-hmm.
Nigeria is now a partner country. Many African countries want to be part of that BRICS, and BRICS has become a new platform for geopolitics also, because BRICS is a counterweight to the G7. The G7 had dominated global finance, global economics for so long, and global manufacturing, but
Mm-hmm.
the BRICS is now creating a new pathway. And this is where we find Africans. This new pathway means that Africans are finding an alternative route that is devoid of the strength, power, and influence of their colonial masters who
Okay.
were who were very well entrenched in the G7. So has a large political footprint in Africa. On the apart from the Russia African Summit, the involvement with production of with the supply of wheat, the importance of with the production of oil, because we should remember that Russia has one of the biggest oil reserves, and by supplying oil to the world at a near controlled rate, because they are not particularly members of OPEC, but they coordinate with OPEC under an instrument called the OPEC Plus. So because they are under that instrument of the OPEC Plus, though they coordinate with OPEC, they still sell their oil and supply to the market at a much more affordable rate, and this helps a lot of African countries. So
Mm-hmm.
here we have a country that has had a long engagement with Africa, has been very beneficial to many African countries. And Ukraine, I should say, that apart from their supply of wheat to Africa, they also became a new source of supply of education A
Okay.
lot of Nigerians and Africans were training in and got caught up in the Ukrainian war in the early stages in the Donbass region. They got caught up in this wars because some of the best medical facilities are in Ukraine and they were
You
schooling
know, a
there and
few
they were
people
training there.
studied
But
medicine.
Ukraine really neglected building strong relationships and affiliations with Africa. They were looking more they were more Eurocentric, they were more Western centric, and they neglected it. And at this time when the war is shifting towards diplomacy, they felt
Yeah.
that even though they are such latecomers to political influence in Africa, they should make an effort. And this visit by Professor by Dr. President Zelensky to
South
President
Africa.
Ramaphosa is an effort. I will say it's a little too late, but you never know the power and influence of personal interactions like that.
Like that. Okay. That's awesome. Now, with US South Africa relations strained under Trump due to tariffs, ICJ genocide cases, and all that, how might Washington's pressure shape Pretoria's balancing act between Ukraine, Russia, and Western allies?
Yes, this is the geopolitical battle going on that I was talking about. South Africa has turned to be a strong opponent of some of the policies of United States. For the sake
Mm-hmm.
of but we will not go into it. But South Africa has become a promoter of um, certain policies. They want certain things to change regarding
Mm-hmm.
U.S. foreign policy, especially as regards the Middle East. And in that regard, they become very militant. They've taken cases to the International Criminal Court. They keep holding some people to account and all that. And they become a thorn in the flesh of some politicians in America. Who really don't like it. This has put them in the crosshairs of the Trump administration. The
Mm-hmm.
excuse actually is that the whites in South Africa are being marginalized due to one newly enacted act that seeks to redistribute land. But it's much deeper than that. It's much deeper than that. South Africa, in its coalition with Russia and China and Brazil, are the main counterweights to the G7, like I've already told you. So this
Mm-hmm.
BRICS institution that South Africa finds itself, if you want to dismantle an organization, you go to the weakest link. I guess somehow the people who shape geopolitics in Washington D.C. have found out that I've found South Africa to be among the weakest links in BRICS, and probably they want now to start to you know how they say if you want to immobilize a spider, you remove one of the legs after the other. So one of the critical legs of BRICS is South Africa, and this may be an attempt to try to um, put them under pressure, make them destabilize them, and
Mm-hmm.
but putting South Africa under pressure. South Africa has shown a certain tendency to fight for its sovereignty. They have a long history. We should remember how they came into being, the
Mm-hmm.
African National Congress, and how their fight against apartheid, and how they stood
Outside, yeah.
against so many people, even though the world was against, the powers of the world were against them. So they have this mindset that they are fighting a just cause. And now they have found themselves to be at the crosshairs of geopolitics. But
Mm-hmm.
it's not only them. It's not only them. The Sahel countries too that we discussed yesterday, last video, Burkina Faso, Niger Republic, and Mali are also in this crosshairs of geopolitics, and that's why we are seeing this attempt to muzzle South Africa. Mm.
Okay, that's awesome. So now another question I have for you has to do, okay, so in 2023, Zelensky urged African leaders to pressure Putin to release political prisoners from Crimea. How effective can African states be in influencing Moscow, given their historical Cold War ties and ongoing trade partnerships?
Well, we should not forget that in 2023 also, just before a June event that changed the dynamics of the war in Ukraine. African leaders, under the leadership, I think over 10 African presidents, over the leadership of South African President Ramaphosa, paid a visit to Putin in Moscow, and they tried to seek peace. They told Moscow, they told President Putin that, look, this war, that war sparked unparalleled inflation. Even we in America here, even those of us in Texas, one of the biggest producers of oil in the world, we were affected. We saw gas prices go up, and we have countries like Tanzania and Comoros and Mozambique that are particularly susceptible to price increases of oil. And the price of wheat was also, because there was a lot of problems in the Black Sea, and they couldn't get wheat out. They were bombing, the Russians were bombing, put an embargo at that time on Black Sea ships bringing in wheat and fertilizer and all that. So it affected a lot of African countries. And African countries came together and went to visit Putin and told Putin that he needs to find a way to stop this war. And he assured them that he will seek the path of diplomacy, and that the war would, if he will find a way to a quick resolution of the war. But unfortunately, see what happened. Not too long after their visit, the Ukrainians did what they called the Great Summer Offensive of 2023. They launched a very brutal offensive against the Russians in the Donbas region. And at that time, the Russians felt that the Ukrainians were not their enemies, that the Ukrainians were the hands of a big coalition of NATO and Western countries trying to invade their country and take them using the Ukrainians. So that invasion, that summer offensive of 2023 made the Russians to change their mind, and they couldn't keep their promise to the Africans then. So, and then that war raged on. The Russians stopped the 2023 counteroffensive, as the Ukrainians called it, and they now launched their own offensive. And since then, they have been doing very well in the Donbass, in the war front. Yeah.
So Zelensky, he emphasized the court of global public opinion during his Africa visit. How do African populations perceive the Russia-Ukraine war? This is a very key one. And does this influence their government's diplomatic choices?
We should know this, right? The hearts and mind game in that Russia-Ukraine war had been won even long before it even started by the Russians. The Russians have had a long involvement with Africa. They are embedded in the economic structures of many African countries. They are pillars to many African security systems because of their large arms sales and everything. But even before that, even beyond that, they had built over several years strong relationship with African countries through a yearly Russia-Africa summit that they host in Moscow, sometimes in St. Petersburg, depending on where. So, but and this has been going on for a long time. They've built bridges across Africa. They have been important because let's not forget one thing. The weaponization of the dollar and the sanctions regime against Africa started long before in Africa, before it even got to Russia. Long before the Russians got sanctioned brutally with 22,000 measures of sanctions, Zimbabwe had been sanctioned for also trying to seek land distribution, a very brutal, debilitating sanction on Zimbabwe that left that country impoverished. Their currency collapsed and they lost their whole middle class. There was no war in Zimbabwe, but Zimbabwe was destroyed. You go to South Africa, Zimbabweans were refugees. You go there, their nurses, their doctors were all walking the streets of Pretoria and Johannesburg. And then you go to London, they had all these Zimbabweans that were now in all spheres of, because Zimbabwe was under an excruciating regime of sanctions. So some African countries have already felt this weight, the weight of American sanctions. So it was, and at that time when they were sanctioned, when countries like Zimbabwe were sanctioned, it was to Russia that they went and found succor. It was
Mm.
Russia that was giving them, even if they could pay or they could not pay, Russia, Mugabe, President Robert Mugabe relied so heavily on Russia's help in the supply of petroleum products, in the supply of fertilizer, in just trying to run their country because Zimbabwe was ruined. And this also happened to Egypt. This also happened to so many other African countries, especially any African country that went against the globalists. They have an organization, a worldview called the globalist worldview, where possibly they may not be instituting democratic process is fast enough, or they may go against some policies like gay LGBT policy implementation in their country. Like Uganda
Mm.
was particularly severely punished for not approving LGBT rules. And they suffer these things, and it is to Russia they go to for succor. At that time, Russia and China. China played a different role in Africa,
Yeah.
a totally different role from that of Russia, you know. So these were the two anchors that gave alternative pathways to African countries whenever they came under the spotlight, the anger and the rage of policymakers from Washington and the West generally. So it's been a long involvement for Russia in Africa. So Zelensky's visit to Africa is a little too late. Especially, let's not forget one thing, something very, very inimical to Ukrainian interest in Africa happened recently. And that was the murder of some Malian soldiers who were being trained, supported um, by a Russian paramilitary group called the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group has Yevgeny Prigozhin, the late Yevgeny Prigozhin, and they support, they help African governments, especially those one in Francophone countries who were having problems with France.
Mm.
They were helping them to replace the French support that they were having before. So
Mm.
Yevgeny Prigozhin's Wagner Group and some Malian soldiers were ambushed by towering and Boboan rebels somewhere far north, close to Algeria, and the hand of Ukraine was in it. They accused Ukraine of giving support to those Tuaregs that attacked this Malian group. So in that regard, Ukraine lost a lot of goodwill with Africa, and this attempt by Zelensky is a little bit too late in trying to repair this relationship.
At least he sees it as necessary, and that's why he's taking the step. So I think it's good. It's
Yes,
good
yes.
either way.
Now that the war is moving from the hot phase to diplomacy. We know that Donald Trump has stated he's not a great supporter of this war. He says it's not his war, it was Biden's war. He doesn't want this war on his laps. This war, people forget that war is a very expensive enterprise, and
Very
it's
costly.
expensive in
Very
resources, it's expensive in money. And America, despite
human lives.
the greatness of America, they have limited resources and they have other realities they want to go and engage with. And they feel that these resources they are tying down resources in Ukraine. Yeah, so
Yeah,
that's it.
that's a good one. So if Ukraine succeeds in establishing itself as a strategic partner for Africa, example via South Africa's ports and financial systems, how might this reshape continental power dynamics, especially regarding Russia's entrenched influence? I like that. That is my segue after. So just
Do
know
you
that
see
we
any
have
party?
only
Let me
about 7 minutes.
you will have how many minutes?
7.
Yes, I want to flip this question on you. I haven't heard all I've said recently now regarding the missteps of Ukraine in Africa and the long, slow boiling build of relationship in this. What do you think? What do you think about this question? Do you think Ukraine can cover ground in Africa, it's so late into this war?
I mean, I'm not sure it can, especially even influence-wise. Russia has more power, really. Now, what I think about Russia is another story, right? So let's always remember that I'll always just speak from my reality and my point of view. So
Yeah,
it's not like I'm trying to laud or praise Russia for having greater influence over, in Africa. Let's even start with that. But the reality, it is a reality. They've been the stronger of the two. So yes, is it too late? Yeah, a bit too little, too late. But even if he starts now and he's able to woo a lot of people to his side, it's still not bad. So yeah, that's my careful response.
adding to what you have just said now,
Mhm.
I think Putin has played a beautiful chess game with Africa.
The world.
To a large extent, the experience of Africa with the West being the countries that mass into the G7 has not been a palatable one. One, because they
Hmm.
have colonial experience, but post-colonial times, post-independence, they had neo-colonial experiences where they
Hmm.
felt that they were at the rough end of most economic and political engagements with the West. And
Hmm.
Russia created a pathway. Russia was gave them the listening ear.
Hmm.
Russia did not meddle in their affairs as much, but they were very careful not to. They created a pathway for them to have somebody to talk to, and Russia has had a very long entrenched relationship. It's not just going to go away in 2 days. It's almost like let's take this thing to another sphere now. Do you have any idea of the relationship between India and Russia?
No, what's the relationship like?
I'll tell you. The same thing that has happened in Africa here now, in Africa, has also happened in India, with India. A situation where the Russians are the largest producers, providers of arms to the to the Indians. And India has had a long traditional relationship with Pakistan, which is the relationship that has even led to war, to the point where both of them had been motivated enough to go and seek nuclear arms. So where we have a situation where America supports Pakistan and Russia always had the support I mean, India always had the support of Russia. You cannot over two presidencies, one of Biden and one of Trump, come and
Mhm.
change these historical relationships and start to think that suddenly the Indians will start loving the Americans. It doesn't happen like that, you know.
It's
These
not overnight
relationships
now.
have been a long one.
Established. Hmm.
Anyway, like I guess because of the constraint of time, I have to say this, right? Africa has
Yes.
found itself in this time and age being dragged into the Ukrainian war. We're not, there's no, apart from the problems that happened with the Tuaregs in Algeria, they're all up in the desert there. We really are not part of the war, but the frontiers of diplomacy is where we are now. We've now found ourselves, and
Yes.
I dare say that in that particular regard, the Russians have already made they are miles ahead. It's like a marathon race, and the other person is already 5 miles ahead or 7 miles ahead, and it's
I
still a good
know.
runner. It's a Kenyan. So let's just imagine it's a Kenyan is already 5 miles ahead. It's not going to be an easy task
It's a
to,
wasted.
to,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
catch up with him.
Yeah. No, I hear
uh,
you. I hear you. But I like
yeah,
the effort though. Hmm.
yeah, we should not forget that even though we are Africans in America, our interest in Africa is very strong because what happens on the continent on an
Affects us.
economic and political space is what causes the refugees and the asylums and all these things that make us all amass and come to
Yeah.
Africa. We know the destabilizing relationship that the Ethiopian wars, the Sudanese wars, the Somalian wars have had in bringing
Mhm.
African refugees and asylum seekers to America. And we always hope that we can mitigate the consequences of these kind of actions that end up being detrimental to the political stability of many African states.
I
We want
agree.
to thank you for following us to this point. of the program. We struggled to rustle up this program today. Weruche is a theater director, producer of a play, and she has been at it. She's been managing. She has a big production coming up in Los Angeles, which we know one day we end up in Hollywood. She has her hands in many pies. She's a new magazine editor, so many other things, apart from also being a mother of two wonderful kids. Thank you very much, Weruche, for being
Thank
the
you too,
for being the
Bimo.
questionnaire today.
Thank you. Thank you. All
Yeah,
right.
we thank you for following us to this point in the program. You know the keywords: subscribe,
Like,
like, and share.
share.
It is like feeding water to the algorithm. It helps us bloom. It helps our channel grow. Thank you
Mhm.
very much for supporting us, and we'll see you again. Thank you.
All right.
Like,
Thank you.
subscribe,
Bye.
and share.
And share. Bye, everyone.